Ethan Hale never imagined that being brilliant could feel so much like being invisible, especially not after a decade of solving problems no one else wanted to touch, problems buried so deep in code and circuitry that only stubborn minds survived them. Yet here he was now, standing in a cramped community workshop on the edge of the city, sleeves rolled up, fingers nicked and blackened from solder, listening to the hum of old machines while his 6-year-old daughter Lily colored quietly in the corner, her backpack propped against a toolbox because there was nowhere else to put it. The layoff had come suddenly, wrapped in polite emails and corporate gratitude, and after that, interviews dried up the moment employers saw the gap, the single dad status, the unwillingness to relocate at a moment's notice. So Ethan stopped chasing titles and started fixing what he could: broken laptops, outdated routers, small miracles for people who paid in cash and gratitude, telling himself this was temporary, even as weeks turned into months. That was why, when the sleek black car pulled up outside the workshop one gray afternoon and a woman stepped out wearing a tailored coat that probably cost more than his monthly rent, his first instinct was to brace himself. She looked out of place, like a sharp line drawn through a rough sketch, and when she walked in, heels clicking against the cracked floor, the room seemed to shrink. She introduced herself calmly as Mara Whitlock, CEO of Whitlock Systems, and the title landed heavier than any insult could have. Ethan felt his shoulders stiffen as her eyes moved around the space, not lingering long enough to accuse, but long enough for him to assume judgment anyway: the exposed wires, the old equipment, the child in the corner who didn't belong in a professional setting. She spoke about tracking down a lost engineer, about a design flaw that had surfaced years later and threatened one of her flagship systems, but Ethan heard only what he expected to hear: that someone like her didn't show up here without a reason, and the reason was never respect. He answered her questions with clipped efficiency, refusing to offer more than necessary, convinced this was some audit or legal precaution, maybe even a cruel curiosity visit from someone who wanted to see how far the mighty had fallen. When she asked if he recognized a particular circuit architecture, sliding a printed schematic across the table, he barely glanced at it before nodding, pride and resentment tangling in his chest. Of course he recognized it. He'd built it in the quiet hours of the night while his wife was still alive and his daughter still slept in a crib, back when life felt like it was opening instead of closing. He assumed Mara's composed expression masked condescension, that her calm tone was the kind people used when addressing problems already solved, and in his mind, the verdict was clear: she looked down on him, saw him as a relic of her company's past, a footnote she could finally afford to acknowledge now that he no longer mattered. Part 2, The Revelation. What Ethan didn't expect was that Mara would sit down, not carefully but fully, as if the unstable stool beneath her was worth the risk, and that she would push aside her phone without checking it once, her attention narrowing until the rest of the workshop seemed to fade. She pulled from her bag a battered circuit board, edges worn, markings faded, and set it between them like an offering, explaining how a failure in a new system had sent her digging backward through years of designs, following subtle signatures, decisions too personal to be accidental, until every trail led to this board and to him. When she apologized, it wasn't polished or strategic, it was awkward, almost heavy, as she admitted that his work had saved the company millions years ago while his name had been lost in a managerial reshuffle she'd never questioned until now. Ethan felt something in him loosen, a knot he hadn't realized he'd been carrying, as she spoke not about charity or second chances but about responsibility, about the cost of overlooking people while chasing growth. She noticed Lily then, really noticed her, and instead of smiling distantly, Mara crouched down, asking about the drawing she was working on, listening as if this small voice mattered as much as any boardroom briefing. When Mara turned back to Ethan and asked for his help, not as an employee to be managed but as a partner to be heard, she laid out terms that acknowledged his life instead of demanding he shrink it: flexible hours, recognition of authorship, support that extended beyond a paycheck. Ethan realized then that the looking down he'd felt had been his own armor, built from too many quiet humiliations, and as it cracked, relief and fear rushed in together. The workshop didn't transform, the world didn't suddenly become fair, but something fundamental shifted as he agreed, cautiously, to step back into the work he loved. Later, as Mara left and the black car disappeared down the street, Lily tugged his sleeve and asked if things were going to be okay now, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan answered honestly that he thought they just might be, understanding that sometimes respect arrives quietly, disguised as accountability, and that being seen isn't about where you stand, but whether someone is willing to look closely enough to recognize what you've always been.